Some people do the most unbelievable things under a blanket, almost undercover, where the world never gets to see it. Cliff Richard was never supposed to be one of them. For 6 decades, he was Britain's polite answer to Elvis Presley, a voice of joy, a symbol of decency, the clean-cut star who never seemed to fall. More than 250 million records sold, 68 top 10 singles, a knighthood from the Queen. He was, by every measure, untouchable. And then, in a matter of hours, everything came crashing down. He found himself the center of the biggest scandal of his life, one he never saw coming, and one that, in the end, did not even exist. The devastating period that followed nearly broke him. He later admitted something that still lands like a punch. "I didn't think I'd ever do an album where I'd be singing brand new songs again, because that seemed to be way past me. But nothing ever felt the same again." And now, at 85, unmarried, childless, and facing a heartbreaking health challenge, things are not looking so good for a man who once dominated the entire entertainment industry. This is the rise of Cliff Richard, and the fall that changed everything. Harry Roger Webb was born on October 14, 1940, in northern British India. His father, Roger Oscar Webb, worked as a catering contractor for the Indian Railways. His mother was Dorothy Marie Dasley. He was the only boy, with 3 sisters, Joan, Jackie, and Donna. Then, in 1947, Indian independence changed everything. The family faced a choice: stay or return to Britain. They chose to leave and sail for 3 weeks on the SS Ranchi to Tilbury, Essex. There was no warm welcome waiting. They moved temporarily into a semi-detached house with his maternal grandmother, then into a cramped 3-bedroom council house in Cheshunt, Hertfordshire, where Cliff shared a bedroom with 2 of his sisters. Money was tight in a way most people would never imagine from a man's later glamour. 3 times a week, dinner consisted of nothing but hot tea and toast sprinkled with sugar. That meal was not a treat or a nostalgic memory. It was the only thing they could afford. At Cheshunt Secondary Modern School, Cliff excelled, earning his GCE in English literature and playing football for both the school and Hertfordshire County. But the thing that truly grabbed hold of him was music, specifically the American rock and roll he heard on records. His parents thought it was a dreadful noise. Cliff thought it was the future. At 16, his father bought him a guitar. He left school for a job as a filing clerk in an electrical factory. And in 1957, he formed a vocal harmony group that would change everything. He called it the Drifters, and soon, at his manager's request, he changed his own name too. Harry Webb became Cliff Richard. On July 24, 1958, at Abbey Road Studios, Cliff Richard walked in to record what he thought would be his breakthrough. The A-side was Schoolboy Crush, but it was the B-side, a song called Move It, written by Ian Samuel and recorded in almost no time at all, that produced a sound that left no room for doubt. Move It reached number 2 on the UK singles chart that autumn. And just like that, British rock and roll had its first homegrown star. The success never really stopped. Cliff made the UK singles charts in every one of its first 6 decades, a feat shared only with Elvis Presley himself. 68 top 10 singles, 14 number ones. For Christmas number ones, more than any other artist in history. A knighthood from the Queen. But none of that success fixed what was quietly broken underneath. The polite smile and the flawless suits covered personal life that never found the same kind of victory. Because while the world saw a man who had everything, Cliff Richard was building his empire on a foundation of something most people never noticed, a loneliness that would follow him for the rest of his life. It all began in August 2014, when Cliff Richard was on holiday in Portugal, and that is where he watched, live on television, from a helicopter hovering above his own home, as police officers searched his penthouse apartment in Sunningdale, Berkshire. He had received no warning, no phone call, nothing. The allegation itself had started nearly 30 years earlier, in 1985, at a Billy Graham event at Bramall Lane in Sheffield. A teenage boy later made an allegation against Cliff Richard. For a public figure who had built his entire career on a clean-cut, family-friendly image, the accusation alone carried the potential to destroy everything. The Metropolitan Police received the allegation while working on Operation U-Tree, in the aftermath of the Jimmy Savile scandal. In July 2014, they passed it to South Yorkshire Police. Cliff denied it immediately and consistently, but the damage was already being set in motion. A BBC journalist named Dan Johnson had learned of the investigation, and what happened next, described in court as a deal, though both sides disputed the word, would become the subject of one of the most consequential privacy cases in British history. Here is what the deal looked like from the inside. The BBC agreed to delay breaking the story. In return, South Yorkshire Police agreed to tip the BBC off about the exact timing of the raid. A retired detective superintendent, Matthew Fenwick, later said he felt forced into the arrangement because Johnson had made it clear the BBC would publish regardless, and the police felt they had no option but to work with the broadcaster to control the timing of the coverage. The result looked very different from the outside. The BBC broadcast live footage from a helicopter hovering above his address. The coverage treated him, as human rights lawyer Jeffrey Robertson later put it, like a bank robber or a mass murderer. Cliff watched it all unfold from Portugal, having received no advance warning of any kind. And if that was not insult enough, the BBC later nominated its own coverage for a Royal Television Society Scoop of the Year award. It did not win, but the nomination alone would have legal consequences. For 2 full years, the investigation hung over Cliff Richard's life. And then, on June 16, 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service announced there was insufficient evidence to proceed with any charges. Cliff Richard was never arrested. He was never charged. The investigation closed without a single legal finding against him, but the damage was already done. The live broadcast had been seen by millions. The story had traveled around the world. His reputation, built over 56 years of relentless work, had been stained in a single day. In July 2016, Cliff Richard did something no one expected. He fought back. He filed suit against both South Yorkshire Police and the BBC. The High Court hearing came in April 2018, and on July 18 of that year, Judge Anthony Mann delivered a verdict that vindicated everything Cliff had been through. The BBC, the judge ruled, had infringed Cliff Richard's privacy rights without legal justification, and in a serious and sensationalist way. The police were found liable too. The damages told their own story. £190,000 in general damages from the BBC, $20,000 more in aggravated damages, specifically because of that Scoop of the Year nomination. The BBC paid 65% of the total, South Yorkshire Police 35%. The police had already paid Cliff £400,000 in a separate settlement, and the BBC agreed to pay an additional £850,000 for his legal fees, plus $315,000 to the police for court costs. But here's the number nobody talks about. The total cost of Cliff Richard himself was £3.4 million. Lawyers, lost business, 2 years of his life he would never get back. A man who had spent decades avoiding scandal had become the subject of a scandal that did not even exist. The court record contained details that suggested the wounds had not healed and might never. Cliff lost a considerable amount of weight from the stress. He developed shingles, a painful condition that often flares up when the immune system is under prolonged attack from anxiety and sleeplessness. He genuinely believed he would have a heart attack or a stroke. He would wake in the night, replaying conversations, imagining outcomes, with an ever-present knot in his stomach. He was disturbed by his own reflection. It felt like someone else, a much older version of himself, was looking back. And here was the cruelest part. He knew he was innocent, but knowing did not stop the physical symptoms. He described feeling as though everything he had worked for his entire life, trying to live as honestly and honorably as he could, was being torn apart. He never lived in the Sunningdale apartment again. He described it as contaminated. He returned only once to pack his belongings, and he put it in terms that cut straight through. A burglary, at least, does not unfold on national television while you watch from another country. But the scandal was never the whole story. There was a quieter sorrow underneath it all. Cliff Richard has sold more records than almost any British artist in history. He has headlined arenas and been a household name for 7 decades. And yet, he has never walked down an aisle. He has never heard someone call him dad. He has always insisted his bachelorhood was a conscious choice, not a lack of opportunity. His faith, after his 1965 conversion to Christianity, taught him that marriage requires total commitment, a commitment he felt he could not balance with the demands of his career. He enjoyed living alone. He did not want to risk a divorce that would conflict with his beliefs. Better, he decided, not to marry at all than to marry and fail. But there was one love he could never quite let go of. In the 1970s, he admitted he was in love with Olivia Newton-John. The problem? She was already engaged. He lost the chance, as he put it, and in a twist that could only happen in show business. She went on to marry twice, including once to Bruce Welch, one of Cliff's closest friends. There were other relationships. The Australian dancer Delia Wicks, the actress Una Stubbs, a romance with tennis champion and broadcaster Sue Barker in the 70s that evolved into a lifelong friendship. But none of them led to marriage. None of them led to children. And in his later years, Cliff admitted something that broke the hearts of his fans. He said he thought he would never be loved because he chose to live a life without a family. He described coming home from the stage to silence and wondering if he had missed something beautiful. He does not regret the music, but there are quiet evenings, he admitted, when he wonders what it would have been like to have someone beside him, not for the spotlight, for the silence. And now, at 85, the body that carried him through 60 years of touring is finally beginning to fail. In late 2024, during an insurance checkup ahead of a planned tour, doctors discovered prostate cancer. He had not even requested the tests. The promoter needed the paperwork to secure coverage, and the paperwork required a medical examination. That examination revealed something that could have remained hidden until it was too late. The cancer was not very old, the doctors told him, and crucially, it had not metastasized. On December 15, 2025, he appeared on Good Morning Britain and announced that the cancer was gone for now. But he did not say it with triumph. He said it with caution, adding immediately that he did not know whether it would come back, because nobody can tell those things. Then he made a plea that came from somewhere deeper than a public service announcement. Get tested, he said. Get checked. He was speaking as a man who had looked at a diagnosis and realized how close he had come to a very different outcome. The physical decline has not been subtle. At the Brighton Center on December 4th, 2025, fans watched carefully and described what they saw. Cliff could not move around the stage the way he used to. His speaking voice seemed frail. But then, the same fans noted something that has puzzled everyone who has seen him perform recently. His singing voice is as strong as ever. Cliff has drawn a sharp distinction between stopping and retiring, and that distinction matters to him more than outsiders will ever understand. He does not know if he ever wants to retire. The word retirement sounds final to him, like a door closing forever and being bolted from the other side. But stopping is different. Stopping means he could change his mind anytime. He could phone his office and ask for a couple of nights at the Royal Albert Hall. And if the hall were free, he would sing. That distinction has allowed him to keep performing without feeling that each tour might be his last. Even though he knows, privately, that the math is becoming less forgiving. In July 2025, a reporter asked whether his Australian tour would be a farewell. His answer was blunt enough to make the interviewer pause. He did not know, he said. He does not even think about it anymore. As he gets older, he will probably become less able to perform, but he cannot say when, and he refuses to guess. The one thing he knows he will eventually have to give up is touring. The travel, the hotels, the nights, the time zones. Each flight takes a little more out of him than the one before. Age has also introduced a new anxiety, vocal unpredictability. For 7 decades, he sang without ever worrying whether his voice would show up on a given night. Now he does, and yet he completed the Can't Stop Me Now tour at the Royal Albert Hall in December 2025. The name was meant to be defiant, and it was also something more. It was a statement of fact from a man who has been stopped repeatedly, by scandal, by law, by age, and by cancer. A man who keeps standing up anyway. Not because standing up is easy, but because sitting down permanently is not yet necessary. He has sold more than 250 million records. But the streaming generation has largely moved on. The live stage is the only place left where his legend physically manifests. That is why he still climbs onto it, even when his legs ache, and his speaking voice sounds frail, and the silence waiting at home grows a little louder each year. He was once the most famous unmarried man in Britain. a figure of endless speculation and quiet mystery. Now, he is simply an old man who lives alone, sings in public, and waits to see what his body will allow him to do next. A man who survived a scandal that never existed. A man who built one of the greatest careers in music history. And who, in the quiet moments, still wonders what would have been like to have someone beside him. So we leave you with a question the man himself refuses to answer. Do you think Cliff Richard should finally retire? If this story changed how you see Cliff Richard, drop Move IT in the comments right now and tell us, should he keep singing or rest? I read every single one. Hit the like button if you believe he deserved better than what the BBC put him through. And subscribe. We tell the untold stories behind the legends you thought you knew every single week. See you in the next one.